Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun had already been getting nervous. Handing Chen Manniao over was the same as putting his poor little life into the control of other hands. It wasn't that he distrusted Chen Manniao, but when it came to critical matters of life or death, putting trust in other people wasn't an option. His trust in Bai Hao was unswerving, but it wasn't the same with Chen Manniao. The giant ghost king was getting extremely angry, so much so that the coldness filling Bai Xiaochun's secluded meditation chamber was tinged with killing intent. Bai Xiaochun immediately thought back to what the giant ghost king had been like right after he had gotten his cultivation base back. He had hovered there with a metal-type diva soul in hand, and had looked at Bai Xiaochun with utter imperiousness as he asked a single question. "Give me one good reason not to kill you." Those words had scared Bai Xiaochun witless, and the way the giant ghost king looked now reminded him of that very day, and those very words. Then he thought about how he had nearly been killed protecting the giant ghost king, and how the restrictive spell had weakened his cultivation base back in the necromancer kettle. Without his heaven-down nascent soul, he would likely have been chased down and killed by the more than 100 chosen who had been his opponents. All of those things weighed down on his heart, and then combined with both the killing intent and freezing pressure from the giant ghost king, and his nervousness about what to do with Chen Manniao. He felt like he was stuck between a vicious wolf and a hungry tiger, and it caused his eyes to turn completely bloodshot. In any other situation, he would definitely be terrified in this moment, but right now, he didn't feel like being terrified. Trembling, he glared at the giant ghost king and said, "You want to kill me? You want to attack me?" He wasn't even terrified in the deepest recesses of his heart. He couldn't help but think about all his dealings with the giant ghost king up till now, and not only did it destabilize his aura, but it made his eyes turn completely crimson. Blue veins bulged out on his face and neck, and he suddenly erupted. "Say that again, giant ghost king," he shouted in rage. "What the fudge? I can't believe you actually want to kill me. You want to attack me? I saved your life, giant ghost king. I nearly died, you fool. I got injured over and over again. And you? You were just testing me out. Testing, testing, testing. Even after your cultivation base was back, you were still testing me. I very nearly got killed before you finally managed to do something. You know what? Fine, I can accept all that. But then, after all is said and done, you're still testing me? I bet you'll still try to test me after I'm dead, won't you?" Bai Xiaochun had completely lost his cool, and was yelling so loud that it had the entire meditation chamber shaking. As for the giant ghost king, he was completely taken aback by the sudden outburst. He had only been trying to intimidate this Bai Hao a bit, with the goal of scaring him. He had never imagined that the result would be like this. "What gall?" he said angrily, glaring at Bai Xiaochun and sending more pressure roiling out. "Gall? Actually, I usually don't have much gall, but today, you bet I do." Bai Xiaochun was so angry he was almost jumping up and down, and his voice only kept getting louder. "Ever since we got back to the city, my friend, it might have seemed like I was relaxing after a big victory. But the truth is that I did a lot important things for you. When I shook down the 3 great clans, the best item I recovered was that spirit jade statue. I knew it would help you in your cultivation, so I secretly delivered to you. But nobody knows that. They think I took everything for myself. Lots of people have been sitting around hoping I would mess up so that they could take the chance to kill me. And it's not like you didn't know, I told you about how worried I was." Bai Xiaochun's yelling had the giant ghost king's chest heaving in rage, and yet, there was nothing he could say by means of retort. Back when Bai Xiaochun had shaken down the 3 clans, the giant ghost king had merely reaped the benefits, and hadn't thought much about what pressure Bai Xiaochun might have come under because of it. "You liked Mrs. Chen, and I didn't hesitate to send her to you. You're the giant ghost king, with a big reputation to maintain, and I'm Bai Hao, a nameless nobody. So I became the scapegoat. Do you know how badly people talk about Bai Hao nowadays? I might as well have the plague. People say that I'm a wife stealer and a husband killer. When I go out in the city, all of the men hide their wives so that I can't even see them. Pretty much everybody hates me. And it's not like you didn't know, I told you about how unfair it all was." Bai Xiaochun was physically shaking, not from fear, but because he had thrown caution to the wind. All of the rancor which had built up in him because of the various events connected to the giant ghost king had reached the point that he had no choice but to vent his feelings in one big eruption. The giant ghost king's rage was reduced again because of what had just been said, and he even started to feel slightly guilty. He had to admit that what Bai Xiaochun was saying was true. The giant ghost king did very much care about his reputation, and had also heard about the vile things people in the city were saying about Bai Hao. I told you I didn't want to go to the necromancer kettle, but you said the ghost king fruit was of vital importance. So I went. And what happened with the fruit? Ha ha ha. Much to my surprise, the restrictive spell, and in fact my own trust in you, became a noose around my neck. Do you know how quickly my cultivation base dropped after that restrictive spell unraveled? Can you imagine the bitterness I felt when more than 100 chosen were all trying their best to kill me? The big bro who I had trusted in actually plotted against me. I almost died in that necromancer kettle. And it's not like you didn't know about that, I told you. The more Bai Xiaochun talked, the more worked up he got. That was especially true of the incident in the necromancer kettle, which continued to stab at his heart like a needle. If it weren't for the fact that he was in the Heaven Dao nascent soul stage, he would definitely have died in there. And there was only one ultimate culprit, the giant ghost king himself. The giant ghost king's mouth was hanging open as if he wanted to respond, and he was still clearly in rage, but at the same time, had nothing to say. Of course, I remember you said that the other 3 heavenly kings were working together against you, and were trying to blackmail you. So despite the bitterness in my heart, despite the grief, I captured all of those chosen so that you could vent some of your frustration. I handed them all over so that you could blackmail everyone else right back. And you think it was out of ill will that I did that? If I really had it out for you, I would just have killed all of them. Maybe it would have made things tough for me, but it would have made things really tough for you. And it's not like you didn't know. I explained it all to you. By this point, Bai Xiaochun's anger seemed to be tinged with despair, and had the giant ghost king hesitating as he thought back to everything that had gone on between the two of them. Let me ask you, giant ghost king, have I ever asked anything of you? Which of the things that I've done have hurt you? And let's not even get into the devil penitentiary. I already risked my life to settle that account. Or was that not enough? The more Bai Xiaochun yelled, the angrier he got. Even people in the tiniest little clans have multiple wives and multiple concubines. And I just want this one girl. Is that really such a big deal? One girl, that's all. And over that, you're actually willing to attack and kill me. The bitterness in Bai Xiaochun's words was such that even the giant ghost king was starting to feel that he really had gone a bit too far. After finishing his outburst, Bai Xiaochun started to recover his senses, whereupon he began to sweat all over. His heart was immediately gripped with anxiety, and he began to wail inwardly as his guts twisted in fear. I'm finished, he thought. Kaput. I lost control and got all impulsive. He already felt like he was about to collapse mentally, but realizing that he had already gotten himself into this situation, he couldn't stop now. Gritting his teeth, he put on the ultimate expression of bitterness. I know, he said softly. I know. You're the king, your highness, and a demigod too. I'm a nobody. You can discard me anytime you wish. I guess what pains me the most is that I foolishly took you to be a true big bro to me. To see Bai Xiaochun standing in front of him trembling like he was caused a bit of a flush to rise up the giant ghost king's neck. If anybody else had spoken to him like this, he would have done nothing more than snort coldly. However, if there was one person in this heaven and earth who qualified to talk to him like this, and even prevent him from responding, it was Bai Xiaochun. And as he thought about the situation, he realized that it was exactly as Bai Xiaochun had said. Bai Xiaochun had served him with loyalty and integrity, and had accomplished all the tasks that he had been assigned. He was also very obedient. Although he tended to be a bit of a brown-noser, the giant ghost king actually liked that. In fact, most of the rewards he had bestowed upon him were honorary at best. He hadn't really given him anything substantive. Furthermore, he was a genius when it came to conjuring flame. He was so daring that he had single-handedly thrown his own clan into chaos, and then kidnapped the king. He had been completely on his own when he crushed virtually all of the top chosen in the wildlands. He was actually such an outstanding person that not even the giant ghost king had ever met anyone like him, not even his own daughter. She had a high cultivation base, but when it came to her strategies and tactics, she simply couldn't measure up. The giant ghost king knew that someone like this would eventually soar to the highest heights, as long as he didn't perish or get killed along the way. If the former happened, then the two of them would be inextricably linked in various ways. Finally, the giant ghost king sighed, and in a very calm and reasonable voice, said, Howard, it's been a long time since I've come to view you as my own son. At this point, Bai Xiaochun sighed inwardly, and knew that the danger was past. Giant ghost king, I only have one question. After we got back to the city together, did I ever ask you for anything? The giant ghost king didn't respond at first. Bai Xiaochun hadn't actually asked for anything other than this one girl. And if you didn't take into consideration her impressive background, then it really wasn't a very big deal. However, Chen Manyao was a personal apprentice of the Grand Heaven Master. The Grand Heaven Master had asked about her, and the giant ghost king couldn't ignore him. After a moment wrestling with the issue, determination filled his eyes, and he looked at Bai Xiaochun, convinced he had come up with a good idea. Well, this Bai Hao is completely outstanding, so, might as well do it. After a final moment of thought, the giant ghost king sighed and said, Howard, you're right, I've never really given you anything. But, I happen to have a daughter who has a higher cultivation base than Chen Manyao, and is even more beautiful than her. 10 times as beautiful. How about I give her hand to you in marriage, huh? Bai Xiaochun said, stunned. He really never could have imagined that after his angry outburst, the giant ghost king would say something like this. You have a daughter? And you want to give me her hand in marriage? Bai Xiaochun almost felt like he was going to faint. Although he had heard that the giant ghost king had a daughter, she was a fairly mysterious person who didn't live in Giant Ghost City. From a very young age, she had lived in Arch-Emperor City. This way, the two of us will be family from now on. The giant ghost king's eyes sparkled as he measured Bai Xiaochun up and down again. The more he thought about this idea of his, the more he liked it. This Bai Hao had a politically correct family background and education, and truly was outstanding. Even more important, his way of thinking lined up with the giant ghost king's. As far as the giant ghost king was concerned, he was the ideal son-in-law, with the only exception being his relatively weak cultivation base. However, that last part was actually a positive, considering that it meant his daughter would be able to keep him in line easily. This Bai Hao has a lot of potential, he thought. With a single drop of my soul blood, he unleashed a demigod-level attack. From that, you can see that he's made a lot of cultivation progress that no one is aware of. That got the giant ghost king thinking about even more benefits to the arrangement. Your Highness, this is an important matter that shouldn't be arranged carelessly. Bai Xiaochun was feeling very nervous. As he looked at the giant ghost king, he imagined what he would look like if he were a bit younger and a woman, and the mere thought caused his scalp to tingle on the verge of exploding. Too ugly. What? The giant ghost king said, think she's not good enough for you. HMPH. Don't even bother trying to compare my Zhou Zimo to Chen Manyao. Her talents surpass Chen Manyao's so much that you can't even mention the two in the same sentence. Once you see her in person, you'll know what I mean. Besides, unless I personally arranged the marriage, she would never agree to be your wife. Glaring angrily, the giant ghost king waved his hand and said, hurry up and give me Chen Manyao. The matter's settled as of here and now. Bai Xiaochun moaned bitterly in his heart. He was out of ideas. If he didn't produce Chen Manyao right now, the giant ghost king would likely start to get suspicious. Therefore, he had no other option than to gamble and hope that either Chen Manyao hadn't recognized him, or if she had, that she would keep it a secret for old times sake. With that, he pulled the unconscious Chen Manyao out of his bag of holding and handed her over. The giant ghost king examined her for a moment. Although he had heard that she was beautiful, this was his first time seeing her, and it caused a strange expression to appear in his eyes. All of a sudden, he understood why Bai Xiaochun had been so staunch in his refusal to hand her over. Wow, she really is a beauty, he thought. Clearing his throat, he glared at Bai Xiaochun again, then swished his sleeve to gather up Chen Manyao. Alright, things are settled. Tomorrow, you'll head to Arch-Emperor City via the teleportation portal. Find my daughter in the Giant Ghost Legion. She's the sergeant major there, so you can start out by helping her with her duties there. As for romantic feelings, they will build up between the two of you naturally. Huh? What's the rush? Bai Xiaochun really had no interest in this Zhou Zimo. Grimacing, he considered refusing, but it was too late. Before he could say a thing, the giant ghost king had issued official orders. Moer sent me a request recently, asking me to send someone to be her assistant. It seems to me that you're the best man for the job. Things are settled. You leave the city tomorrow. Oh, by the way, Moer wants to become strong and powerful on her own merit, so not many people know who she actually is. As for the nobility who do know, there's a tacit understanding to keep things a secret. Don't go and stir up trouble. With that, he turned and vanished. Bai Xiaochun was scowling on the verge of tears. He didn't want to marry this Sergeant Major Zhou Zimo whom he didn't even know. Besides, he was already a major general. As if a sergeant major could compare to that. As far as the Giant Ghost Legion was concerned, Bai Xiaochun remembered capturing a soul cultivator by the Great Wall who had claimed to be the apprentice of one of the Giant Ghost King's marquises. It was a bit strange. Why would someone from Giant Ghost City have been all the way on the other side of the wildlands? However, considering the insurrection that had taken place, perhaps that man had been dispatched by one of the rebel heavenly marquises to handle some personal matter. Of course, Bai Xiaochun had no desire at all to go to Arch-Emperor City. The place seemed far too dangerous. That was especially true considering that he wasn't sure if Chen Manyao knew who he was. If she did, then he could be sending himself right to his own grave. And there was more. He had kidnapped many of the heirs apparent and other important chosen who came from Arch-Emperor City. If he went to the city now, he would be like a lamb walking into the tiger's den. And yet, refusing to go wasn't an option. The Giant Ghost King had made his stance clear. Bai Xiaochun had thrown a tantrum already, and if he tried to do the same thing again, then it really would harm his relationship with the king. If that happened, then he would be in a bad position even in Giant Ghost City. How did things end up like this? He thought, tugging at his hair. At this point, Bai Hao floated out of his bag of holding, a look of complete and utter amazement on his face. Just now, he hadn't dared to reveal even the tiniest scrap of his aura to the Giant Ghost King, but had been able to hear the conversation perfectly clearly. And as a result, he was left sighing in shock at how brave and daring his master was. Of course, he wasn't aware of the fact that Bai Xiaochun's mask would make it virtually impossible for anyone to detect his presence, so his extreme caution hadn't been necessary. Master, I've heard some things about the Giant Ghost King's daughter. She's a very mysterious figure who left Giant Ghost City long ago to further her cultivation. With that, he went on to explain everything he knew. Unfortunately, that wasn't much. In the end, Bai Xiaochun sighed and continued to ponder the matter. In the end, there was nothing he could do. Eventually, he trudged out of his meditation chamber and went out to make some inquiries of his own. Most of his questions had to do with Arch-Emperor City, the others being about the Giant Ghost King's daughter. After returning, he sat there grimacing and gnashing his teeth. Arch-Emperor City is a terrifying place. I absolutely can't go there. Worst case scenario, I can leave Giant Ghost City and find a place to hide for a bit. Night passed. By evening of the following day, Bai Xiaochun knew that he couldn't dawdle any longer. He didn't dare to use the teleportation portal, so he came up with an excuse to request the use of a giant ghost battleship to go to Arch-Emperor City. His current plan was to disappear along the way and hide out for a while before returning. If enough time passed, then perhaps the Giant Ghost King would finally understand how he truly felt. In terms of the giant ghost battleship, he had long since had his eye on them, and knew that they were wonderful treasures. This was actually the perfect opportunity to take one out for a spin. At least, that was his explanation. Unfortunately, the Giant Ghost King was one step ahead of him. It was with an enigmatic smile that he approved Bai Xiaochun's request for the giant ghost battleship, and then gave orders for Duke Deathcrier to help him pilot the ship, and also protect him along his journey. Duke Deathcrier was a bit confused about why Bai Xiaochun wasn't just using the teleportation portal, but considering that the orders came from the Giant Ghost King, he didn't question them. Soon, Duke Deathcrier was piloting the giant ghost battleship away from Giant Ghost City, with Bai Xiaochun standing there on the deck with a blank look on his face. Bai Xiaochun wanted to cry, but no tears would come. As for Duke Deathcrier, he had a somewhat grim expression, and completely ignored Bai Xiaochun. As of this point, it was obvious that his plan had been seen through by the Giant Ghost King, and he had no option other than to continue on to Arch-Emperor City. Duke Deathcrier is a diva, so with him piloting the giant ghost battleship, the journey will take about 3 months. Bai Xiaochun looked down at the jade slip he held in his hand, which contained a detailed map. Giant Ghost City was actually relatively close to Arch-Emperor City, as opposed to Nine Serenities City, which was much further away. If Duke Deathcrier had piloted the giant ghost battleship from there, it would take a full year to make the journey. Of course, if Bai Xiaochun piloted the ship, the journey would be even longer. Plus, it was a journey that would have been fraught with danger without a diva present. He had no choice but to accept his fate. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, he contemplated all of the information he had gathered about Arch-Emperor City. The Arch-Emperor dynasty was organized with the Arch-Emperor at the top, followed by the Grand Heaven Master, and then the 4 Heavenly Kings. Underneath the kings were the 10 Heavenly Dukes, and 108 Heavenly Marquises. Each of the Heavenly Kings had 10 Heavenly Marquises in their home cities, but no Heavenly Dukes. Duke Deathcrier and his contemporaries were only earthly dukes. Although they ranked above the heavenly marquises, they were far below the heavenly dukes. The 10 heavenly dukes were the most powerful devas in the wildlands, all of them being in the great circle of the diva realm. They actually counted as one of the reserve powers of Archemperor City. As for the heavenly marquises, there were 68 of them who lived permanently within Archemperor City itself. Archemperor City was by far the largest city in the wildlands, and was also meticulously organized. Floating in the sky above the main city itself was the Imperial Palace. The Imperial Palace had 4 main gates, which defended the 4 cardinal directions. After the Grand Heaven Master seized control of the Son of Heaven, it was an easy thing for the 4 heavenly kings to stay away from the city. However, the Grand Heaven Master had ordered that their armies remained garrisoned in the region of Archemperor City, ready to follow any orders they were given. The army encamped west of the city was the Giant Ghost Legion, the commanding officer of which was the Giant Ghost King's daughter, Zhou Zimo. Bai Xiaochun hadn't been able to get much information about Zhou Zimo back in Giant Ghost City. All he knew was that she didn't get along very well with the Giant Ghost King, and had long since left the city to practice cultivation on her own. As for how her relationship with her father was now that she had risen to the rank of Sergeant Major, it was impossible to tell. This Zhou Zimo obviously is a bit of a rebel. HMMMPHH. How could silly little girls like that understand how to lead an army? As a magnificent Major General, I guess I'll just have to go show her how it's done. He sighed, feeling quite bitter. He hadn't had enough time to gather much more information than that. Although Duke Deathcrier probably knew some information, he didn't seem too pleased about being forced to take Bai Xiaochun on this long journey, and completely ignored the questions he asked. Although Giant Ghost City wasn't extremely far away from Archemperor City, it still took Duke Deathcrier months of work to get them close. And he was a diva. If Bai Xiaochun had been piloting the ship alone, the spiritual power wastage would have been immense. Even by replenishing himself with soul medicine, it would have been difficult to keep going for very long. Most importantly of all, he would have faced 10 times the amount of danger. Whether it was the bizarre creatures that inhabited the wildlands, or the hordes of souls with their profound death auras, they were all things that left Bai Xiaochun trembling in fear. Of course, the souls would have been easier for him to deal with, but as for the beasts, they were shocking to the extreme. At one point along the way, he saw a towering tree that was so shriveled it looked dead. However, it could move, and would consume anything that got too close to it. He saw an enormous beast that resembled a hippopotamus. It was sleeping, but its snores were so mighty that they caused the sky to vibrate, and shook the lands for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. There was a flock of vicious vultures that followed the giant ghost battleship for several days before begrudgingly letting it go. The sight of all the bizarre creatures left Bai Xiaochun's mind reeling. They encountered a few cloud gyres, which caused even Duke Deathcryer's face to flicker. Only by piloting the ship at full speed did he manage to evade them. At one point, Bai Xiaochun noticed that the ground down below was pitch white, and assumed it was snow. However, closer examination revealed that it was a sea of bones, covered with waves just like water. The powerful aura radiating up from the sea of bones caused Duke Deathcryer's face to turn pale. Drawing upon a taboo magic, he negated the aura of the giant ghost battleship, and then pushed forward at full speed for several days until the sea of bones vanished behind them. The sights changed, and the winds blew past. Thanks to this journey, Bai Xiaochun truly came to understand that crossing the wildlands without using a teleportation portal was something that only devas could do. Duke Deathcryer's face grew more and more grim as they faced one danger after another. He was not happy at all about the situation. It was all because of a single order from the giant ghost king, and all because the damnable Bai Hao had refused to use the teleportation portal. Because of that, he, a mighty diva, was forced to be a bodyguard. It didn't matter that Bai Hao was favored by the king, Duke Deathcrier was still feeling very disgruntled. However, there was no way for him to vent his feelings, so he simply ignored Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun knew that he had dragged Duke Deathcrier into the matter, and therefore, took the initiative to try to smooth things out. Although he didn't completely succeed, his efforts were moderately successful. One day, as the giant ghost battleship streaked through the air in a beam of light, Bai Xiaochun was able to catch sight of a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering city up ahead, a city far more magnificent than Giant Ghost City. In terms of size, it could contain at least 10 giant ghost cities. The green city walls towered over the surrounding plains, casting immense pressure into the hearts of anyone who looked at them. There were countless restrictive spells locking the entire area down, taking the pressure of heaven and earth and using it to protect the city. The power of the 5 elements was harnessed to suppress even lightning and thunder. As a result, the city looked like an enormous beast of paragon-like power, resting but ready to erupt with power at a moment's notice. Countless towering green pagodas could be seen within the city walls, each one of which had an enormous crystal ball at its top. Each crystal ball had violet mist sealed inside of it which crackled with lightning, and occasionally transformed into huge eyes. It was difficult to put into words how much life force thrummed inside of the enormous city. However, the amount of qi and blood that Bai Xiaochun could sense was astonishing. How many people live there, he thought, shocked. As he examined the city, he couldn't help but look up to see another city floating in the air above the main city. It was smaller than the city below, and completely golden in color. There was something domineering about it that made it stand out from everything else in the area, as if it were something that could suppress the entire wildlands. Even the air around it seemed to be crushed by its presence, as if this city were something completely different than everything else in heaven and earth. Considering the golden light that shone out from it, it almost seemed like an enormous golden sun, or a gigantic golden castle in the clouds. It was none other than the imperial palace of the Arch-Emperor dynasty. 8 islands floated in the air around the imperial palace, each of them covered with clouds and rainbows. They appeared to be something like guard stations, there to protect the imperial palace against any outside forces. From what Bai Xiaochun could tell, the rainbows on those islands vastly surpassed those from the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. After all, there was only one rainbow structure in the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect, but here, each of the islands had one. Furthermore, those islands were only one part of the defensive network protecting the city. Countless soul cultivators in golden armor were on patrol, making Arch-Emperor City completely and utterly astonishing to behold. Bai Xiaochun had seen quite a few cities in his life, and Arch-Emperor City existed on a different level than all of them, and that included the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun felt as if he understood the world a bit better. And that was before he even studied the 4 armies which were encamped in the 4 cardinal directions around the city, filled with countless wildlander cultivators. Above each army flew a banner identifying it. One of them featured a huge green battle axe, which showed that they were the forces from 9 Serenities City. There was a blood-colored banner without any symbol on it at all, which represented War Champion City. As for Spirit Advent City, their symbol was a vicious-looking eye that seemed to peer out at all heaven and earth as the banner rippled in the wind. Last was Giant Ghost City's banner, which was easily identifiable because of the giant ghost sigil on it. The giant ghost had its arms spread wide, and wore a vicious expression, as if it wished to rip the heavens to shreds. So those are the 4 legions. Bai Xiaochun thought, mind spinning. All of a sudden, he felt the nervousness that came along with being in the headquarters of the enemy. What would happen if they found out that I'm Bai Xiaochun, he wondered. The mere thought caused his face to turn as ashen as death. It was at this point that he realized he had missed something, and looked up at the clouds in the sky. Suddenly, the enormous head of a dragon dipped down out of the clouds, its enormous whiskers floating in the air beside it as it stared coldly at Bai Xiaochun. A moment later, it lifted its head back up into the clouds. A dragon, he thought, his eyes widening. Then he could see the long, serpentine form of the dragon swirling through the clouds, as well as its terrifying claws. Off to the side, Duke Deathcrier gave a cold harumph but didn't say anything. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed reverently on Arch-Emperor City. This was the heart of the wildlands. As a diva, Duke Deathcrier understood matters much better than Bai Xiaochun. He knew that what was visible out in the open was only a part of what made up Arch-Emperor City. There was more of it underground. There was a 3rd city underground that was 10 times larger than the part which rose up above the plains. 3 cities above, he murmured to himself, 3 in the middle, and 3 below. They formed what was spoken of in legend, the 9 heavens. He had never seen the true Arch-Emperor City, which was something that had only existed in the distant past. Back in its golden age, Arch-Emperor City was like 9 collective heavens that dominated the world. However, after Heavenspan rose to prominence, Arch-Emperor City declined. Then a grand war was fought in which heaven and earth were split apart. Heavenspan replaced the Arch-Emperor dynasty, and occupied the island in the middle of the Heavenspan Sea. As for Arch-Emperor City, it was during that war that the lower 3 cities were shattered, and the middle 3 cities were crushed. The only thing that remained were the top 3 cities, which fled to this location, gasping for life, where they remained down to this day, attempting to recover. Currently, only the top 2 cities were visible above ground, with the 3rd city remaining beneath the earth, buried and incapable of rising. Finally, Duke Deathcrier looked away from Arch-Emperor City and took Bai Xiaochun to the west side of the city, where the giant ghost legion was camped. Before long, they were at the entrance of the camp. Having no desire to remain around any longer, Duke Deathcrier waved his sleeve, sending Bai Xiaochun flying off of the giant ghost battleship and down to the main entrance. Voice hard as stone, he said, "The task assigned me by His Highness the King is now accomplished. You're on your own now, Bai Hao." Without another word, he turned the giant ghost battleship and sent it speeding into Arch-Emperor City itself. Clearly, he had his own matters to attend to. Furthermore, he would return to Giant Ghost City via teleportation portal, not by making the long journey on the ship. Duke Deathcrier's arrival caused quite a stir in the Giant Ghost Legion. Beams of light immediately flew over to the main entrance of the camp, and the 2 squads of soul cultivator guards stationed there immediately looked from the departing giant ghost battleship over toward Bai Xiaochun. "Who goes there?" one of them said, his voice threatening and seemingly dripping with blood. Clearly, these guards were the type who had seen countless bloody battles and had frightening murderous auras. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times as he watched Duke Deathcrier leave, then turned to face the main entrance of the army camp. Scowling on the verge of tears, he decided that since he had gotten this far, he might as well keep going forward one step at a time. "There's no way I'm going to lose any face," he thought. "I'm a big shot here too. After all, the giant ghost king is giving me his daughter's hand in marriage." Having reached this point in his train of thought, he looked at the soul cultivator who had just called out to him from the main entrance. Sticking his chin up, he put on the most unfathomable expression he could muster. Tossing out his identity medallion, he clasped his hands behind his back and proudly said, "I am the Grand Majordomo and Inspections Commissioner from Giant Ghost City, Bai Hao, and this is my identity medallion. Take me immediately to see your Sergeant Major. She is my fiancée." Bai Xiaochun stood there, pompous and haughty, clasping his hands the way a truly consummate chosen would, as if he could crush the entire army camp if he wanted to. The 2 squads of cultivators manning the main entrance were shocked, and didn't even know how to respond. They weren't particularly impressed with the first part of what he had said, but the last part left them gasping in astonishment. They actually didn't know about Zhou Zimo's relationship to the giant ghost king, but he was their king after all. To hear the person he had sent say something like this was a huge shock. The sergeant major is his fiancé? Is this for real? This Bai Hao, I remember hearing about him. He's one of the top aides to His Highness the King. Could it be that the king is rewarding him by arranging this marriage? The powerful experts who had been shocked by Duke Deathcrier's sudden appearance earlier had also heard Bai Xiaochun's shocking words, and as a result, their expressions flickered. They looked incredulously at Bai Xiaochun, and then examined his identity medallion to confirm who he was. Although strange expressions could be seen on their faces, they didn't dare to delay, and quickly relayed the information up the chain of command to request orders about what to do next. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased at the reaction to his words, and mused that his days as a major general had truly given him an imperious way with words that surpassed ordinary people. Feeling quite proud, he cleared his throat. "Very well, I'm coming in now." As he began to strut forward, the soul cultivators of the Giant Ghost Legion exchanged awkward glances, but didn't dare to get in his way. However, before he could take more than a few steps, a beam of light shot toward the entrance from somewhere in the middle of the camp, resolving into the shape of a young woman. As soon as she arrived, all of the surrounding soldiers breathed sighs of relief. She didn't appear to be very old, and had a core formation cultivation base. She was very pretty, with snow-white skin, and eyes that sparkled brightly. There was something formidable about her, but at the same time she was extremely attractive. That was especially the case considering that she wore a suit of tight-fitting leather armor that perfectly accentuated her sensuous curves. Bai Xiaochun immediately perked up a bit as he wondered if this was Zhou Zimo. However, considering the level of her cultivation base, it didn't seem likely. After looking her up and down, he was just preparing to say something when she coolly said, "Come with me. The sergeant major wants to see you." There was little respect to be heard in her tone of voice, and after finishing speaking, she turned and headed back into the camp. As she walked away, Bai Xiaochun simply couldn't help but once again marvel at her attractive figure. So, she's not Zhou Zimo after all. HMPH. Quite the nerve she has. He was definitely not very pleased at his reception so far. No matter what the situation was, he was still the famed majordomo of Giant Ghost City. However, Bai Xiaochun also reminded himself that he wasn't the type to nitpick, so he simply snorted and followed the young woman. As he walked along, he thought about what the Giant Ghost King's mysterious daughter would be like. Considering what the king had said to him, she was even more incredible than Chen Manyao. If he was lying to me, then I'll figure out some reason to leave Arch-Emperor City and get back to Giant Ghost City. Having made up his mind, he swaggered after the young woman into the camp. As he looked around, he could see quite a few people looking over at him with quizzical expressions, occasionally leaning over to whisper to each other. "Who's that? I can't believe the sergeant major's personal guard is escorting him. I just heard some voices from outside. Supposedly this guy claims to be the sergeant major's fiancé. What?" As the whispered conversations reached his ears, Bai Xiaochun felt prouder of himself than ever. As he made his way through the army camp, he realized that it was quite large. Based on his estimates, there were probably around 1 million troops garrisoned here. Tents stretched out in all directions, seemingly without end. There was something stern and harsh to the camp that made Bai Xiaochun think about the Great Wall. As the young woman hurried him through the camp, Bai Xiaochun got the strange sensation that some of the people around him seemed familiar. However, there was little time to ponder the situation as the female cultivator led him to a huge red tent in the middle of the camp. It was fully 300 meters wide, and considering that evening was falling, it was already lit by flickering torches. It was heavily guarded, and the entire area radiated a bleak and deadly air. All of the guards had completely expressionless faces. Even as Bai Xiaochun and the personal guard approached, their gazes remained completely icy, as if they didn't care who Bai Xiaochun was. If he showed the slightest errant behavior, they would all attack him immediately. It was at this point that his heart quivered a bit. Although he had been hurried through the camp, he could still sense that there were many powerful experts present. From what he could tell, some of them were even half a step into the Diva realm. However, he couldn't sense any aura at all coming from inside the bright red command tent. Even as he approached, he heard a cold snort echo out from inside. "You still haven't found him?" It was the voice of a woman, and it sounded like she was growling through clenched teeth. There was something incredibly shocking about her, as though she could surpass heaven and earth. The way the air vibrated sent a twinge of fear through Bai Xiaochun. "That aura, it's from a diva." There was even something about the aura that seemed familiar. Before he could spend any time thinking about it though, a rumbling sound could be heard as a statue flew out from inside the tent. The statue depicted a person, and was already shattering to pieces as it flew out of the tent. However, most of the head remained intact, and it rolled across the ground until it came to a stop at Bai Xiaochun's feet. When he looked down at it, his eyes went wide, and all the hair on his body stood on end. The portion of the head that remained intact revealed a fact that looked much like his own. Not Bai Hao's face, but his true appearance. This, he muttered. Before he could collect his thoughts, the woman's voice could once again be heard inside the tent. "Keep looking. I refuse to believe that we can't find that damned Bai Xiaochun." Bai Xiaochun shivered, and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. Whether it was the aura he was sensing, or the voice, there was something so familiar with it that if he couldn't place who it was by this point, it would mean he had memory problems. Although he was now sure of who this person was, he still couldn't bring himself to believe it was true. Even as he stood there shivering, the tent flap opened, and another female guard appeared. An unsightly expression could be seen on her face as she completely ignored Bai Xiaochun and began to clean up the shattered pieces of the statue. However, because of the tent flap suddenly being opened, Bai Xiaochun could now see inside to a woman sitting there. When he saw her face, he felt like a million lightning bolts were striking his mind. Mistress Red Dust. His face turned as pale as a sheet, and his legs began to shake. Sitting there in the tent was the very same person he had cursed in his heart over and over again, the same person with whom he had fought in the necropolis. Mistress Red Dust. Never could he possibly have imagined that the giant ghost king's daughter would be Mistress Red Dust. Clearly, Zhou Zimo was her name, and Red Dust was a Taoist name. Shaken, he suddenly realized why so many people in the army had seemed familiar. These were the very same necromancers and soul cultivators who had participated in the war at the Great Wall. He had even fought some of them personally, and many of them had cursed him to death because of his soul convergence pills. A few had even experienced incredible humiliation because of the enormous beasts that had consumed his enhanced aphrodisiac pills. These were people who hated Bai Xiaochun with an undying passion that defied description. In fact, in all of the wildlands, nobody hated him more than this group of people. Back when he had been at the Great Wall, information about the wildlands had been very hard to come by for some reason. Even after becoming a major general, he hadn't learned very much about the wildlanders other than that they were all enemies. He'd never been given any information about the specific forces they faced, or where they came from. Heavens! The Giant Ghost Legion. Mistress Red Dust. Heavens! What am I doing here? I've been dropped into the lion's den. As he wailed in his heart, and as his mind reeled, he shivered and backed up a step. His first instinct was to flee from this place as quickly as possible. The mere idea of what would happen if his identity were revealed filled him with intense anxiety. However, before he could do anything, Mistress Red Dust's cold voice echoed out, "Who's sneaking around out there?" The surrounding guards' gazes instantly locked onto Bai Xiaochun, and the killing air that rose up was readily apparent. Even the female guard who was cleaning up the shattered statue looked at him with cold eyes. Bai Xiaochun really wanted to cry as he stood there, wilting inwardly as everyone looked at him. What do I do? What do I do? I hate you, giant ghost king. There he stood, unsure of how to respond, heart pounding with fear. Then, Mistress Red Dust's cold voice again rang out from within the tent. Take him away and execute him. As soon as the words rang out, the killing air in the area seemed to take corporeal form. 10 beams of light immediately began to shoot in Bai Xiaochun's direction, making it seem like the army camp itself was like the mouth of some chaotic, primeval beast that wished to devour him. We haven't even talked, and she already wants to kill me. An intense sensation of deadly crisis immediately swept through Bai Xiaochun, and at the same time, the diva pressure weighing down on his flesh and blood had him wailing inwardly. He had to do something. Zemo, he said loudly, your father the giant ghost king sent me. I'm your fiancé, Bai Hao. Countless jaws dropped in response to his words. After all, few people knew of the relationship between Mistress Red Dust and the giant ghost king, and therefore, this news was completely stunning to everyone. What? The Sergeant Major is the daughter of His Highness the King? Is it true? Even as the news began to rock the entire giant ghost legion, an enraged shout erupted from the bright red tent. Shut up! The tent flap flew open, and Mistress Red Dust appeared, her expression matchlessly grim, her eyes flashing like lightning as she looked at Bai Xiaochun. It was almost as if she could see right into the center of his being as she sent more diva pressure weighing down onto him. Hatred burned in her heart over the fact that Bai Hao had revealed her connection to the giant ghost king in order to get out of the earlier situation. Whether it was the ordinary soldiers or Mistress Red Dust's personal guards, all of them were staring at Bai Xiaochun with wide eyes and odd expressions. Although none of them had yet fully digested the news about how their sergeant major was connected to the giant ghost king, when they saw the look of fury on her face, her personal guards exchanged awkward glances and then backed away. In fact, their expressions even brightened as they prepared to watch the scene unfold. Bai Xiaochun fought to keep his expression the same. It was hard though, especially considering that, in the moment in which Mistress Red Dust had thrown open the tent flap, he had seen that inside were 7 or 8 more statues of himself. Clearly, Mistress Red Dust had them at hand to use to vent her anger whenever she felt like it. From those statues, it was easy to see how deep her hatred ran. This Granny Red Dust really won't give up on her idea of killing me. Bai Xiaochun was getting so nervous that beads of sweat covered his forehead, and he was moaning in his heart. He had never intended to intentionally piss off Mistress Red Dust, but in the moment, he had had no other choice. If he had reacted even a little bit slower, he would have been dragged away and executed. Although it was possible she had only been trying to intimidate him, he hadn't been confident enough to bet on that option. The only way to save himself was to cause a big scene, which was why he had called upon the name of the giant ghost king to put Mistress Red Dust and her army in place. I hate you, giant ghost king, he thought, livid with regret at how things were playing out. He simply couldn't understand why he was so unlucky to have been screwed over by the giant ghost king yet again. Standing right there in front of him was Mistress Red Dust, clad in a crimson suit of armor, looking very valiant and formidable, and pulsing with a murderous aura. To say that Mistress Red Dust was astonishingly beautiful was no exaggeration. Her skin was as fair as snow, and her phoenix-like eyes sparkled as if with starlight. She had an oval face, with a fair neck that one would expect to see on a statue. The armor she wore accentuated her ample chest and her curvaceous hips, giving her an attractive hourglass figure that perfectly matched her long, slender legs. In terms of beauty, she and Chen Manyao were very similar. However, Chen Manyao was like a noble orchid growing in a secluded valley, whereas Mistress Red Dust was like a bright rose bristling with razor-sharp thorns. If things hadn't played out the way they had in the necropolis, or if he really was Bai Hao, then to have a fiancé this beautiful, and a diva at that, would have left him feeling very happy. But instead, his heart was pounding with fear, and he felt like the sky was turning dark overhead. To him, Mistress Red Dust was not a spectacular beauty, she was a deadly wild beast or a fiendish monster. Even as everyone stole glances at Mistress Red Dust, reeling in shock about her relationship with the giant ghost king, she stood there, her expression turning grimmer by the moment, her anger surpassed only by the humiliation she felt. "Did you just say you're Bai Hao?" she said coldly. Although she did not speak loudly, her voice was filled with the might of a diva, causing the air to distort and a gale-force wind to spring up out of nowhere. Bai Xiaochun swallowed hard and then replied in a shaky voice, "Just let me explain, Zemo, I." However, before he could complete his sentence, the vicious loathing in Mistress Red Dust's eyes grew more intense than ever, and she spoke in a voice as cold as midwinter snow. "You're the notorious wife-stealing, clan-reviling Bai Hao?" Mistress Red Dust had heard many stories about Bai Hao, and was especially repulsed by how people called him a wife-stealer. Bai Xiaochun simply couldn't stand to be wronged in this way. The true wife-stealer was not him, it was Mistress Red Dust's father. "But that was because His Highness the King told me to." "Shut up, my father is above board and righteous about everything. You're a debauched, sinister bootlicker who persecutes good and loyal men." At this point, the truth about who she was had been revealed, so Mistress Red Dust didn't see any need to try to keep it secret. Her hatred and loathing growing more intense by the moment, she spoke in an even icier voice than before. "Don't even consider talking about matters relating to my father the king. Furthermore, you don't qualify to be my official Taoist partner. You just stay out of sight in the camp here, and if I see even a single bad report about you, I'll have you executed immediately." Mistress Red Dust had been told that her father had arranged for her to be given in marriage to Bai Hao, and was clearly not happy with the idea. Not giving him another glance, she spun and stalked back into her command tent. The surrounding guards continued to look over at him with odd expressions on their faces. "That's it?" Bai Xiaochun thought, standing there blinking a few times. However, considering what had just happened, he now knew that Mistress Red Dust had no idea who he really was, which led to him heaving a sigh of relief. Although he was still a bit nervous, there was also something a bit exciting about it all that had him trembling as he stood there. She really didn't recognize me. And now she's my fiancé. He was actually feeling so exhilarated that his throat felt dry. Then he thought back to the scene which had just played out, and the wheels in his head began to turn. It actually seems like she was just trying to scare me. Furthermore, she clearly wants to ruin her father's plans for the marriage. In that case, she definitely won't hurt me. After all, I'm backed by her own father. However, it's really impossible to say, so I still have to be careful. In any case, I definitely can't stick around in the Giant Ghost Legion. It might be exhilarating, but it's too dangerous. The slightest mistake on my part and my poor little life would be out the window. I really am in the middle of the lion's den here. With those thoughts on his mind, Bai Xiaochun turned and hurried away nervously, his heart pounding in his chest the entire time. Things had spun out of control so quickly that he still hadn't recovered, and was still racked with nervousness. Before he got very far, though, a whistling sound could be heard as one of Mistress Red Dust's personal guards flew over and blocked his path. "Majordomo Bai," she said coldly, "you're going the wrong way. Follow me to your quarters." Although her cultivation base wasn't very high, as one of the Sergeant Major's personal guards, she still carried herself in a very intimidating fashion. To see this young woman standing in his way caused Bai Xiaochun to immediately plaster a haughty and angry expression onto his face. "I'm not going anywhere," he said coolly. "Since the Sergeant Major doesn't approve of me, I'm leaving." "It's beyond your control, Majordomo Bai. The Sergeant Major said that she wants you to stay in the camp, so I advise you not to disobey her orders." As soon as the words left her mouth, other soul cultivators in the area turned to look at Bai Xiaochun. Clearly, if he disobeyed orders, they would attack him immediately. "What gall?" Bai Xiaochun growled, his eyes widening into a glare. Of course, inwardly he was shivering in fear at the sensation of so many auras locking down onto him. Ignoring Bai Xiaochun's posturing, the young female guard said, "Please don't make me go hard on you, Majordomo Bai. Follow me." Inwardly, he was feeling very nervous. However, he really didn't want to stay in the camp, and furthermore, he knew that not only was he backed by the Giant Ghost King, he still had the restrictive spell inside of him. Although most of the restrictive spell was gone, it would still be partially effective. On top of all of that, he had come here on orders. Therefore, it was very unlikely that he would face any serious threat to his life. "She doesn't know that I'm Bai Xiaochun, but I was so nervous about it earlier that I immediately backed down. The more I back down, the stronger her position will be. In that case, it's time to stick to my guns. I don't care what they say, I'm leaving." However, he still didn't feel completely safe about everything, so he secretly took out a transmission jade slip and sent a voice message to the Giant Ghost King. "Giant Ghost King, your daughter wants to kill me. Is this the marriage you supposedly arranged? I'm about to die. Not even waiting for a response, he suddenly looked up, a vicious and fiendish look on his face. Eyes blazing with cruelty, he looked at the red command tent and yelled, "Sergeant Major. What's the meaning of this?" His voice echoed out like heavenly thunder, ringing out through the entire army camp, attracting the attention of all the soul cultivators. If you don't want to acknowledge the marriage agreement put in place by the Giant Ghost King, then that's fine with me. But as the majordomo of Giant Ghost City, do you really think you can prevent me from leaving this camp? If so, then you can't blame me for acting rashly. To accompany his angry words, he unleashed his nascent soul cultivation base, causing a killing air to fill the entire area. At the same time, he kept his eye on the tent to see what reaction would come. I've dominated the field wherever I went for years now, he thought. I created the wind charm, and received countless love letters. Let's see how this measly granny red dust responds to this move. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.